Last I heard, Eli Drinkwitz was Penn State's leading candidate in this coaching search. But why go with him when he's not your best candidate?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host as always. Welcome into another edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network out there. In today's episode, we are talking about just an update on Chaz Coleman, right? Sat out injured. Is he transferring? Rumors were swirling. I also want to focus on the Penn State offense and how they're going to take a step forward. We'll get to that later. A recruiting disaster is pending. Penn State's top verbal commit is more than likely to transfer away. I'll give you an update there. But Eli Drinkwitz, last I heard, he is the leading candidate for this Penn State coaching job, but why when he's not your best option? Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Friendly reminder to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, as we'll talk about Eli Drinkwitz, but in this conversation as well, Jeff Brohm is still a realistic candidate. Alex Golesh, Penn State, they were trying to hit the home run, the grand slam even, with Mike Elko. So why is it seems like a lot of attention is on Eli Drinkwitz. And a source had told me that, hey, it's looking more likely that this is going to be the case. It's not to say that, this is happening, there's an agreement in place. It's just that Drinkwitz has now emerged as the leading candidate. But Penn State set out to win, or at least declare that their intention is to win national titles. So why Eli Drinkwitz? And Drinkwitz, in some regard, is actually pretty similar to James Franklin. So you essentially fired James Franklin to get somebody that is kind of similar to James Franklin in their coaching background. So I'll explain that. I think Drinkwitz is a good coach. I do think that, but I don't know that this hire. No, I do know. I do know that this hire doesn't get you closer to a national championship. Because what is Drinkwitz bringing that James Franklin didn't actually have as a head coach? I think you're getting more of the same. I think you're getting somebody that is a good football coach. Drinkwitz, I think, is a little better in regard to the X's and O's. James Franklin, extremely good program manager. The CEO, which is somewhat needed in this era, but could just never deliver against Ohio State when Michigan was at its peak. Oregon, Notre Dame, anybody that was in a big game just couldn't win. If it was a big game, they couldn't win. And for Drinkwitz, it's kind of the same thing here. Drinkwitz actually doesn't win a lot of big games himself. Here's where they're similar. Okay, so yes, the big game tally. But Drinkwitz, takes over at Missouri. Does a good job, elevates the program, right? Missouri's not a powerhouse in the SEC. They're usually a bottom feeder. Franklin, same thing with Vanderbilt. You can't win at Vanderbilt, yet he was successful, which is how he was able to leapfrog to a better job like Penn State. So that's the similarity that I really see, aside from the big game success, but that they spent some time in the SEC where they elevated a program that's not as respectable in that conference, made them better, and are now capitalizing on it, if this happens to be the case. But Drinkwitz, the concern for me is, again, I think he's a good coach. Offensive savvy, because he's been an offensive coordinator, he's been a quarterback's coach. So that's where I will give him the check marks. But he doesn't have any connections to Pennsylvania. He doesn't have any connections even in the Northeast. He's going to have to build out those connections. Now, here's the plus of bringing in Drinkwitz. I'm not saying this is an awful hire. I'm just saying, does it move the bar? Does it move the needle? Not really. So it's a good hire, but I'm expecting that you might actually get a little more of the same. I'm hoping I'm wrong in this instance, or that Penn State's able to get a better candidate in my mind. So that is Jeff Brohm. That is, well, Mike Elko. It seems downright impossible, but Penn State, the intention that Penn State has is they want to push as much as they can. It's just not going to happen because of the playoff. You can't afford to wait for someone like Mike Elko or even Kalen DeBoer. Penn State was interested in Kalen DeBoer being a possible head coaching candidate. So with that being said, Drinkwitz is a leading candidate because he's honestly the most realistic. Missouri's all but out of the playoff race. He's had enough success to say, okay, hey, if you can elevate, the idea is that if he can elevate Missouri, then he can elevate Penn State. And he's had success recruiting up in the Northeast. I mean, we should know. He was able to get Bo Pribula to transfer down to Missouri. He out-recruited Penn State for top in-state quarterback and once upon a time a 5-star prospect in Matt Zollers. So there's some appeal. There's some connection with Drinkwitz, but it's not like he has all these connections and all these ties throughout the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, Ohio, anything like that. I'd go with Jeff Brohm. If it came down to the two candidates, I'd go with Jeff Brohm because I've said it every single time when discussing this coaching search, is that you need somebody that gives you something that James Franklin never could. And with Brian Hartline, that's superb player development. Particularly wide receiver, right? But how about Jeff Brohm, since he seems to be a little more realistic here? Ohio State's going to be in the playoff. Do you want to wait? And then you don't get the transfer portal aspect where players will follow. So Drinkwitz, you'll get Missouri players to follow. You will get SEC caliber, Power 2 conference caliber players to come to Penn State. That is appealing when the 2026 schedule is extremely winnable, and Penn State could and should be right back in the college football playoff if things all go well with the portal. In regard to Jeff Brohm, Brohm wins his big games. He was 3-1 at Purdue and won a game against Ohio State in 2018. James Franklin never did that. So he's winning big games at Purdue. He upset number 2 Miami of Florida this season at Louisville. It seems like Louisville is also trending in the wrong direction where they're going to miss the college football playoff. So that's all these factors combined together. Who's the most realistic? How does the timeline line up? You also have Alex Golesh. I'm not opposed to Alex Golesh because I feel like he has a higher ceiling. With Drinkwitz, okay, he's a solid candidate. A little more unknown with Alex Golesh because he's been a group of 5, group of 6 head coach, whatever we're calling it over at South Florida. But he's more of an offensive mastermind, more of an offensive guru. And I'm tired of the mediocre offenses at Penn State that I just want to see almost something radically different. I want to see Penn State put up 50, 60 points a game. Now, I know that's a very large exaggeration there because Golesh, doing that at South Florida, you're not going to be able to instantly do that in the Big Ten. But you would see a more comprehensive offense, I imagine, with Golesh. But same thing. He doesn't have that connection to the Northeast, to Pennsylvania. You're going to have to develop that over time. You can do that at Penn State, or at least surround yourself with coaching staff members that do have those connections. So that's where it makes sense to keep Terry Smith or potentially Deion Barnes or Ty Howell or Dan Connor, since they played at Penn State and they've been recruiting well. That's a completely different conversation. My point being is that this is why Penn State is where it is. Elko, Kalen DeBoer, the coaches that they were swinging after, they are most likely not going to get because of the playoff timeline. And then do you really want to compromise your recruiting class? Because what if they say no? They say no, then you're really in a bad spot. Then you miss out on all your preferred candidates and you're really scrambling. And then what do you do? I mean, you could go with a temporary solution. I don't know what that looks like. Does that mean you make Terry Smith the full-time head coach if you go after and you take a major risk on Mike Elko or Kalen DeBoer changing their mind, or Alabama and Texas A&M letting them walk away, or trying to outbid those institutions for their head coach after a successful season? All to be determined, and nothing is set in stone. That's what I'm here to say. But as of right now, over the past few days, Drinkwitz is the leading candidate. I'd go preferably with Jeff Brohm or Brian Hartline because they give you something extremely different that Penn State hasn't had in a decade plus with James Franklin. Let's talk about the recruiting disaster that's pending here. because regardless of who you get at head coach, if you get the slam dunk in Mike Elko or you get Brian Hartline, this class of 2026 is getting ready to fall apart. I'll explain why and how they could potentially, possibly, maybe salvage it. Not likely, though. That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by Gametime. College football, we all love it. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why you got to use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can pull up Gametime, and in just a couple of taps, you'll see amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. And if you've never been to a stadium, if you've never been to a venue, this is a great feature on Gametime. You can actually see your point of view ahead of time. So you're not second guessing what tickets you're selecting because you'll know beforehand what your POV is going to look like. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Now let's talk some Penn State football recruiting. I wish I had better news. Maybe things change. Probably not. The way that this is trending is bad for Penn State, but they knew this. They took the risk knowing that 2026 and 2027 were going to fall apart when they fired James Franklin. Now, did I think it would get this bad? Because I commend Terry Smith and the staff for trying to keep the class together. Guys hadn't necessarily decommitted, but they stayed verbally committed while opening up their recruitment at the same time to see what their options are. And again, I do not blame them. Do not blame the player or their families for wanting to explore better options because you don't know who Penn State's going to hire. Now, Penn State gets Mike Elko, okay, but even still, do you want to wait that long when you're ready to commit in December? And if Penn State makes a head coaching hire towards the end of November here, because that's the way that things are trending. As of right now, again, based on what we discussed in segment 1 with Eli Drinkwitz, the idea is that Drinkwitz would be hired at the end of November and then try to get to work. But my focus wouldn't even be on the 2026 recruiting class. My focus would be on the damage control with the transfer portal. Not only do you have to recruit the players over, hypothetically, again, this is whether it's Drinkwitz from Missouri, Brohm from Louisville, Mike Elko in Texas A&M, right? All these different timelines, all these different options for Penn State. Drinkwitz is going to have an uphill battle because not only do you want to bring some of your Missouri players over, you want to retain some of these Penn State players. We'll talk about Chaz Coleman in a moment in the final segment because he's rumored to transfer to Ohio State and that he's quit on this season. But I think about players like Tony Rojas or Amari Campbell or King Mack. Guys, AJ Harris, again, I know that they haven't had the best seasons. Ethan Grunkemeyer, I thought he performed very well, and that's why I think Penn State's offense is going to explode against Michigan State. Again, moral victories, I know they don't exactly matter here. But the new head coach is going to have to focus on the transfer portal. That do you even have time to give a second thought about the class of 2026? In respect to it, though, I did a recent crossover, and if you missed it, you'll get a more full perspective on Kevin Brown, who's Penn State's top verbal commitment at this point in time. This is a guy that you want because I think he could play right away for Penn State with as much turnover as there is going to be on the roster, with the entire starting offensive line looking completely brand new. Speaking of which, you would want to retain a player like Cooper Cousins. Can you keep him from entering the transfer portal and going somewhere else? You got a lot competing against you in the short term for Penn State. Again, this is a messy transition. How it's going to look after, it might be better. Again, that's the gamble that Penn State is taking, that, oh, we are going to be better because of this move. We are going to take multiple steps backwards so we can take a hop, skip, and a leap forward after all of this is done. Just know that it's going to come at a cost. Kevin Brown, is a player that can be a captain. I think I don't want to label anybody a surefire first round pick out of high school, but my goodness, Kevin Brown checks a lot of boxes. I said that Kevin Brown and Jasir Rogers, if any two players from this 2026 recruiting class of Penn State can retain their commitment, well, Rogers is committed to Oklahoma. Okay, that's done and over with. Brown still verbally committed, but it's not looking good. And Kevin Brown is a prospect that would be able to do a lot of recruiting for you. So if you can retain his commitment, then that's a domino effect where other prospects might say, oh, if this guy's sticking around, then maybe I should reconsider. Penn State very well might lose its entire class of 2026. Saw a recent update in the middle of this recording that a player, Pierce Peterson, who, relatively quiet, hey, this is good, maybe he's not reconsidering, reopens his recruitment. I get it. I really do. I don't fault any of these prospects for wanting to explore their options. Fortunately for Penn State, it is not the end of the world because you have the transfer portal. These are guys that would not play right away necessarily. Maybe a couple of them, maybe a few of them. Kevin Brown, for example, maybe a Matt Sieg. But a lot of these prospects, hey, it would be year 2, year 3 where they would take that next step. Okay? You have the transfer portal. You can go get starting caliber players. You can go get veteran players. So it's not the end of the world, but it is a pending disaster. You don't want to lose your class of 2026, ideally. You'd like to be able to retain some of these prospects. You'd like to be able to retain the ones that are still verbally committed, but they are exploring their options. That's why Penn State's kind of in a situation where it's a double-ended sword. You're going after a head coach, but do you want to wait? And then that coach doesn't get time to build the relationships that are necessary. Class of 2027, That doesn't matter in the scheme of things. Class of 2026. But when I talk about a recruiting disaster, yeah, it stings to lose Kevin Brown. Yeah, it's going to sting when this could potentially be a situation where there aren't any commitments. Now, however, Penn State is still an attractive destination. I don't think Penn State's going to be in a situation where they're going to have 0 commitments for the class of 2026. Penn State's still a top 10 program in the country. They are still in the Big Ten Conference. None of that changes. If you're a football prospect and Penn State offers you and wants you to play for the Nittany Lions, you still want to take that opportunity. You still want to take that chance. But that's the head coach's job. And the coaching staff, whatever that's going to look like, there are just so many unpredictable factors here that are in play. And I don't want to see someone like Kevin Brown end up going to A, Ohio State, or B, West Virginia. Both of those schools have leverage for Ohio State for obvious reasons, right? You don't want somebody that is a top tier prospect playing within the conference. But then West Virginia, hey, West Virginia, if Rich Rodriguez gets going in the Pittsburgh area and starts to work his way back into Pennsylvania, Kevin Brown's that kind of player that can at least give some sort of leverage to West Virginia. I'm not saying that Penn State's going to be out competing, they're not going to be in a spot where West Virginia is just going to dominate them in recruiting. That's bad news for Pitt. Okay, that's who that impacts. But this is not a Pitt podcast. This is not a West Virginia podcast. I'm saying that it doesn't help. Okay, it doesn't help in the scheme of things. So the Nittany Lions have their work cut out for them. Fortunately, there is the transfer portal at the end of the day. So whatever head coach that you do get that is at another program, you will get a chunk of their roster just to follow them. And then that's the Band-Aid. And then you start working on 27 and honestly get a head start on 28. Rely on the transfer portal for the first couple of years. See what you can do in 27. I would try to hit the ground running and get a head start on 2028 because why not? Why not? Now, Chaz Coleman, I mentioned, is one of those players that you don't want him to transfer out. You don't want him to go to Ohio State. He's from the state of Ohio. It makes sense. So what is the latest there? Because he didn't play on Saturday against Indiana. That's a bad sign, but apparently it's not, according to interim head coach Terry Smith. and why the offense is going to finally break out against Michigan State. That is coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot and an even bigger payout. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And that can be used on anything. NFL, college football. Lines are available for Penn State versus Michigan State. The Nittany Lions are favored by 7.5 points, minus 295 on the money line, plus 240 if you're thinking Michigan State for the upset. The total is set at 50.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel. Remember, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So what's the latest on Chaz Coleman, star freshman defensive end that you do not want transferring out? And that was the initial reaction. Oh, he's not playing. He magically shows up on the availability report and does not play against Indiana. Surely he's opting out and wants to enter the portal to transfer back to Ohio State. According to Terry Smith, he's day-to-day dealing with some, again, Penn State is not going to reveal any injuries specifically. They'll say day-to-day, week-to-week. I think Terry Smith has been a little more transparent as far as talking about injuries, bumps and bruises than James Franklin was. So at least that's an indication that Coleman is expected to play against Michigan State. Maybe he picked up an injury Wednesday, Thursday. Again, media, we only see 10 to 15 minutes and get to talk to coach for 10 to 15 minutes afterwards. So would not shock me if something happened Thursday. And it's like, well, do we play him? Do we really want to do that if it is serious enough? So it's a cautionary tale, right? Because yes, it would make sense for him to transfer out, go to Ohio State. He's from the state of Ohio. Larry Johnson was seen talking to him after the game. I get it. But he did commit to Deion Barnes. I don't know what Deion Barnes' status is as far as staying with the Nittany Lions, right? All of it's to be determined. But if I had to say one way or another, I would like Chaz Coleman to stay at Penn State. I see a lot of the same elements in his game that Abdul Carter has. Yeah, he's comparable to Abdul Carter. And that means a lot of people are going to be after him to enter the transfer portal. So just know that it is probably more likely that he goes rather than stays. Never say never, but that's how I would frame it right now. Just good news to know that he is not stepping away from the team and that he's going to finish the season. Okay, I respect that there. That's what I wanted an update on. Now the Penn State offense. I mean, this group is ready to go off against Michigan State. Michigan State's defense is not good. It's a personnel issue. They don't force turnovers. They don't really get after the quarterback. I mean, this is a game where I'm expecting at a minimum 30 points from Penn State. Now, I know that this is an instant letdown spot. You lose another demoralizing game. You get close, you knock on the door, and it's slammed right there. Again, Northwestern, Iowa, all of it. All of these games stack up on one another. And will Penn State have the mental fortitude to push through against an opponent that's not going to give you a lot of juice? I mean, heck, Michigan State and Penn State can relate the most that they've been able to relate to one another over the past decade. They can commiserate together. There's just no energy, no juice for this game for Penn State. However, I see the building blocks there for Penn State. I'm a little more concerned about their defense than I am the offense because Ethan Grunkemeyer has a lot to play for. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen certainly do with the records, with their NFL draft stock. Trevor Pena found some rhythm with Grunkemeyer as well. So when you combine all of these things, here's what I'm seeing. You faced the number one defense in Ohio State and a top 5 defense in Iowa on the road for your first 2 career starts if you're Ethan Grunkemeyer. Mistakes, bad quarterback play is going to happen when that is a true characterization of being thrown into the fire. Grunkemeyer, literally 2 top 5 defenses on the road at a minimum against Iowa and Ohio State. And then Indiana, by some measure, a top 10 defense as well. So in back-to-back-to-back games, Grunkemeyer faced 3 top 10 defenses conservatively. But when you actually rank them, a top 5, the number 1 defense, and a top 10 defense, all in 3 consecutive games as a first-time starting quarterback. Talk about being thrown into the gauntlet. Talk about the biggest test that you could get right out of the gate. And Grunkemeyer continues to impress me. Does he miss some reads periodically? Yes, because he is a first-time starter. He cleaned up some of the accuracy issues. He was in sync with Trevor Pena. He was in sync with Kobe Howard. Michigan State's defense is not even remotely close to what Penn State has faced over the past 3 weeks. The plays were starting to materialize. We've all been tough on Andy Kotelnicki. He's not calling the right plays. His game plan is a little Terry Smith continues to, it seems like he is pushing Andy Kotelnicki to change the game plan, and it's working. There is a downfield passing attack. It is there. It is materializing, and it is going to go boom against Michigan State. Expect at least 30 points against Michigan State. This Penn State offense should be humming. Nicholas Singleton finally found his footing. Katron Allen, off game against Indiana, but still, he's had a productive season. The offensive line is solid. They're good enough for a matchup against Michigan State, but it's the step forward, the jump forward that Grunkemeyer had. I mean, he had a great game against Indiana, mostly in the second half, but still, that was a good game. Overall, great second half against a top 10 defense. Looked the part. Honestly, and if you compare and contrast Grunkemeyer's performances to Drew Aller in some of these big games, you can make the argument that Grunkemeyer has been better, actually, in some of these big games. It's crazy to think, but Aller didn't have those kinds of Grunk's performance against Indiana tops pretty much all of Drew Aller's performances against Ohio State, Michigan, and others. If you combine them together, Grunk's second half against Indiana very well might be better. So I'm eager to see what this offense is able to put together with the passing attack finally developing. Nicholas Singleton getting some confidence back. The offensive line, healthiest it's been, and still a solid group above all else. And Kotelnicki finally calling some better plays. And I've already talked about it. In the scheme of things, it's not going to matter to the Penn State fan because the season's a lost cause, right? Who cares about a bowl victory? I totally understand. However, it is something that I'm expecting against Michigan State. This offense should be humming along for the rest of the season because the foundation is there and they're going to continue to build momentum as long as they don't get in their own heads because they can self-sabotage. They absolutely can. That is a possibility, but you still, with the individual aspects of you have to either go off to the NFL or you got to put some solid tape together if you plan to leave Penn State or you want to impress the next coaching staff. There's still individually a lot to play for. Heck, if you're Jim Knowles and Andy Kotelnicki, you might be coaching for your next job. So you got a lot to prove. That's what I hope is enough motivation to keep this Penn State team together because the season goals are obviously, they continue one by one to fall off. But hey, there's still a bowl invitation out there, right? My name is Zach Seyko. I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. As always, your daily source for all things Penn State. And I mean that. Football, recruiting, wrestling, basketball, hockey. You get it all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Also the #1 sports podcast network out there. So thank you so much for checking out another edition. If you're new to the channel, subscribe to YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams.